Chapter 1. The Streetlight. There is a particular kind of silence that exists in the middle of a storm. Not the absence of sound, but rather the opposite, a density of it. Rain hammering asphalt, wind curling around the corners of buildings like something searching for a way in, thunder rolling across the sky so low and heavy that you feel it in your chest before you ever hear it with your ears. Emily Carr had walked home through storms before, many times. She knew the rhythm of a November night in this city, knew the way the gutters would overflow and send little rivers racing toward the drains, knew the way the streetlights would turn each raindrop into a small and momentary star. She was not a woman who frightened easily. That is what she would tell herself later, and she would almost believe it. It was a Tuesday. She remembered that specifically, the way you remember the mundane details of a moment that changes everything. Tuesday, the 14th of November. And she had worked late at the office because Marcus had needed the quarterly projections by morning, and she was the only one who could make the numbers cooperate. She had left the building at 10:30, pulling her coat tight and tilting her umbrella against the wind, and she had begun the 12-minute walk home that she had made hundreds of times before. The city was largely empty at that hour. Not completely. Cities are never completely empty. They simply change their population after midnight, swapping the suited and the purposeful for the hunched and the hurrying. But the street she walked along, Ashford Lane, was quiet enough that she could hear her own footsteps between the gusts of wind. Her boots were good ones, leather with a low heel, and they made a clean, deliberate sound against the wet pavement. She counted them without meaning to. It was a habit. She had always counted things when she walked alone at night. It gave her mind something to do. The rain intensified as she turned onto the long, straight stretch that would carry her past the park. She had considered taking a different route. The longer one, the one that kept her under shop awnings and away from the exposed openness of the park's iron fence. But it was cold, and it was late, and the detour would have added another 7 minutes to the journey. She chose the direct path. She always chose the direct path. She noticed the smell first. It was difficult to describe, and she would struggle to articulate it to anyone who later asked. The city in the rain had its own smell, concrete and metal and something vaguely biological. The city sweating out its history through its pores. But beneath all of that, threading through it like a needle pulling dark thread, was something else. Something that reminded her of the moment before a lightning strike, that charged electric quality the air takes on when the sky is about to tear itself open. Ozone. Sharp and cold and old. She breathed it in without thinking, and felt something shift in the back of her mind, some quiet alarm that had not been tripped before. She walked faster. The park fence ran alongside her to the left, those iron railings black and gleaming with rain. Through the fence she could see the park itself, the paths winding between leafless trees, the yellow smear of a distant lamp casting a circle of light that the darkness pressed in around from all sides. The trees moved in the wind, their bare branches scratching against each other, and the sound they made was dry and clicking despite all the water in the air, like fingernails against wood. She was nearly at the midpoint of the fence, where the old stone gate stood open to the park's main path, when the street light above her flickered. It was not an unusual thing. Streetlights flickered in storms, when the power stuttered and surged. She barely registered it consciously, just a brief dimming and brightening that her peripheral vision noted and dismissed, but then it flickered again and again. And the quality of the flickering changed, became rhythmic, became almost deliberate, an on-off pattern that suggested something other than a power fluctuation, something more like a signal or a heartbeat. Emily stopped walking. She stood in the rain, her umbrella drumming above her, and looked up at the light. It steadied itself as though it felt her attention, burning with orange-yellow constancy, and the rain fell through its cone of illumination in bright silver lines. She watched it for a moment, feeling faintly ridiculous, and then she looked away. That was when she saw the figure. It was standing at the far end of the block, at the edge of where the next streetlight's reach ended and the darkness between the two lights began, standing perfectly still in the rain, not sheltering under an awning or hurrying through the downpour the way every other living person in the city was doing, simply standing in the dark, in the rain, motionless. Emily's eyes adjusted. She was perhaps 40 meters away from it, and the light was poor, filtered through rain and the general murk of a stormy night. The figure was tall, or seemed tall, though distance could lie. It was dark, dressed in dark clothing, and it was standing in shadow, so that its edges blurred into the surrounding darkness in a way that made it hard to hold in focus. She squinted and felt a peculiar reluctance to look directly at it, a pulling sensation behind her eyes, as though her vision were trying to slide away from the shape the way water slides away from an oiled surface. It's a person, she told herself firmly. It's just a person. But the firmness with which she told herself this said something about how unconvinced she was. The figure did not move, did not shift its weight, did not tilt its head against the rain, did not bring up a hand to wipe its face. It stood with an absolute stillness that was wrong, in a way Emily could feel, but not immediately name. It was the stillness of something that does not need to move, the stillness of something that is waiting, and that has all the time in the world to wait. Thunder moved through the sky above her, deep and rolling, and Emily realized that at some point in the last 30 seconds, she had stopped counting her footsteps. She had stopped doing anything except staring at the dark shape at the end of the block. She took one step forward, then stopped. The figure had not moved, and yet something about it felt different. She could not have said what. The angle of it, perhaps, or the way it occupied its portion of darkness. It felt, and this was the word that would come to her later, lying awake in the small hours, it felt attentive, as though it had been standing there for a long time, in its quiet, patient way. But now it was aware of her specifically, in the way that a predator becomes aware of the particular animal it has decided to follow. The rain picked up. The street light above her buzzed. Emily looked away. She told herself she was simply checking that the road was empty before she crossed. And she looked down at the wet asphalt. And she felt a coldness against the back of her neck that had nothing to do with the rain. Her coat collar was up. Her umbrella was angled against the wind, and yet the cold reached her anyway, settling against her skin with a precision that made her breath catch. It was the kind of cold that has a quality to it, that carries information. Not just absence of warmth, but the presence of something else, something that pushed warmth away. She did not look back at the figure. She made herself not look back at it, in the same way you make yourself not run when something with teeth is near, because some ancient part of the brain knows that movement invites pursuit. She simply walked. She put one boot in front of the other, listening to the count, 1, 2, 3, 4, and she kept her eyes on the middle distance and she walked. But she could feel it. That was the most precise way she could describe it, to herself and later to others. She could feel it. the way you can feel someone's eyes on the back of your head in a crowd, that prickling electrical awareness of being observed. Except this was not merely that. This was stronger, more total. It was the feeling of being seen by something that saw all the way through the surface of her, saw past her coat and her skin and her reasonable adult mind with its reasonable explanations, and found whatever was underneath, whatever was soft and vital and afraid. She walked faster. Her umbrella pulled in the wind, and she tightened her grip on it, and she turned her face into the rain, and she walked. The next streetlight came up around her like a warm bath, and she kept going, past the end of the park fence, past the shuttered newsagent and the dark windows of the dry cleaner, left on Merchant Street and then right on Colton Road, and she counted her steps the whole way, 212, 213, and she did not stop, and she did not look back until she was standing in front of the door of her building with her key in her hand, and only then, with the lock between her fingers, did she turn. The street was empty. Of course it was. Just the rain and the light and the ordinary darkness of a Tuesday night in November. She let herself in. She stood in the lobby for a moment, water dripping from the hem of her coat onto the tiled floor, her heart doing something heavy and fast in her chest. She pressed the button for the elevator and watched the numbers count down. 3, 2, 1. The doors opened and she stepped inside, and she pressed the button for the 4th floor, and she watched the lobby shrink behind the closing doors. Just a person, she thought again, standing in the rain, but later, in her apartment, she would stand at her window and look down at the street below. She would watch the rain for a long time. She would tell herself she was not watching for anything specific, and she would be lying, because she had felt it, that cold, complete, specific attention, that sense of being chosen, and the most frightening part, the part that would follow her into sleep, that would be waiting for her when she woke at 3 in the morning with no memory of what she had been dreaming, was not the figure itself. It was not the stillness of it, or its dark, impossible shape, or the way her eyes had kept trying to slide away from it. It was the fact that she had only looked away for a moment, only a second, perhaps 2, while she checked the road. And when she had looked back, the figure had been closer, not at the end of the block anymore, much, much closer, 20 meters, maybe less, standing still in the rain with that patient, dreadful stillness. And she had not heard it move. She had not heard it move at all.